Hello. Okay, good. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry for all those tech issues. You know what would help with me getting over tech issues? Consider clicking a link in the description for a donation so I can, I don't know, pay somebody to teach me to not be such a moron. Okay. All right, so Lloyd, we're going to talk about some crazy links between Masonry, Islam, and even the infamous KKK, which everyone associates with a sort of pseudo-Christian-y background, but it's actually a different history, as you have discussed on other platforms. Is that correct?
Guilty as charged.
Guilty as charged. And I've seen Lloyd talk about this on other platforms. It blows my mind. And as we did last time, he's done these, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, one of your series was 25 parts. He's done these long series. We're going to sort of condense this into about an hour and a half, and it's going to be like drinking through a fire hose. So you got to pay attention. And so, Lloyd, if you want to just share your screen there, we can get your slides going.
And so you've seen the series. Are there any particular highlights or any place you want me to start that I should
Well,
focus on?
we did our episode where we did the background on, we did the background on Freemasonry already. So people sort of, if they didn't do that, they can see that. And then I know part of this is based on the Gnostic links. A lot of my audience is Catholic, so they've heard about Gnosticism a lot. So maybe we can sort of do a shorter overview of Gnosticism and then sort of get into how that directly plays into the Masonry and KKK. Does that work for you?
Okay, yeah. So
Excellent.
let's see. Let's check what the delay is on the feed. And
It's pretty good. It's coming through clean on my side.
yeah, coming through clean. Just waiting to see how long it takes to get to YouTube. So, an important Islamic fact. I think it's important for us to start with some clarity. This is known as a hadith, one of the reports attributed to Muhammad. These are things like very similar to the table talks of Martin Luther or Hitler. And it says here, I heard the messenger of Allah saying, do not kill your children secretly for the milk, with which a child is suckled while his mother is pregnant, overtakes the horseman and throws him from his horse. Praise
Okay.
be to Allah.
That's strange. Okay.
So I think the only thing we can take from this is that Allah works in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah, that's right. And has nothing to do with Islam.
that is also true. So, as everyone knows, Allah has nothing. Well, Islam has nothing to do with Islam. Okay, so I'm going to be brief, and I hope I don't butcher the subject matter because I'll be stripping out a lot of detail
Sure.
to just show some brief highlights. So, Gnosticism is the greatest threat to ever face the church. It was present at the founding of the church, and there is more Gnosticism present today than there has been at any time in the last 2,000 years. Now, Islam is explicitly a Gnostic religion. The Sharia of Islam, the law of Islam, is the is explicitly telling us that Islam is Gnostic, and the major scholars of Islam all tell us explicitly that Islam is Gnostic. Now, the Nicene Creed is also written explicitly to refute, in the majority of cases, Gnosticism. And within Islam, you'll find, as we covered last week at some length, that the Islamic Sirah, the Gospels of Muhammad, or the biographies of Muhammad, talk about the deity of Muhammad. And Islamic history is rife with magic, the occult. It is steeped in magical rituals, and these connections extend to the Templars. They extend to the Hermetics, to Hermeticism, or Hermes Trismegistus, otherwise known as the Egyptian god Thoth, the Roman god Mercury, the Greek god Hermes, extends to the KKK, the Shriners, and the Freemasons. In fact, Muslims claim to be the original Freemasons, the foundation, the source of the Freemasons.
So I'm going to add something there. I grew up in London, Ontario, and I lived downtown near Catholic Central High School. And I never knew the connection at the time because I was not a practicing Catholic. I wasn't really. I didn't have any understanding of the history, but I lived a block from my school, which was the oldest Catholic school, which was about 3 blocks from the cathedral. And beside me, 2 doors down or 3 doors down, was the Masonic Temple. And kitty corner to that, across the block, kind of as the crow flies from one corner to the other, was the Shriners Lodge. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think those were there by accident. I think they pinpointed those exactly beside the Catholic structures in the city.
Yep. So tell you what, I wonder. So where did you say you want me to go first? What was the very first
So,
element
yeah, we'll just
that I
go
can
through sort
jump?
of the Gnosticism background to understand it a little bit, and then we can jump into how we see this in Islam and the Masonry and the KKK.
Okay, so Gnosticism holds the world of matter is cursed. The world of matter is evil. It was created by a god with no light, a dark god, Satan. That Satan is the equivalent of the biblical god Yahweh. The world is ruled by this lesser god who is actually lower than humans. Only the spirit world, the world of imagination, is good, and liberation is attained through esoteric knowledge. Knowledge is good, ignorance is evil. To contrast that with Islam, Islam has the concept of the Jahiliyyah. In the Jahiliyyah, what you have is many people term it the time of ignorance, the time before Muhammad, before the coming of Islam. This is not a correct understanding. It is the condition of ignorance. If you're not a Muslim, you are living in the condition of ignorance. Therefore, you are in the Jahiliyyah. If you're Catholic, if you're anything else, not a Muslim, you are in the Jahiliyyah. You therefore are in the period, not in the period, you are in the condition of ignorance, and therefore you don't have the secret knowledge. You're not an initiate into the mysteries. So, and this is what the Gnostics believe, that not having this secret knowledge is evil, and therefore you are evil.
I
It
knew
denies
it.
the incarnation. Yes, go on.
I was going to say I knew I was evil. Thank you for reaffirming that for me.
You're very welcome. Right now, these are all schools that reinterpret the Christian faith. So, and of course, they are all anti-Christian ideas. Now, this is from McClintock and Strong from the Biblical Cyclopedia, and this is the same James Strong as Strong's Concordance of the Bible. They give us this interesting definition. The name Gnosticism was applied to a variety of schools that differed in their interpretation or reinterpretation of the Christian faith. Notice they say here, they seldom pretended to demonstrate principles on which their systems were founded by historical evidence or logical reasonings. They rather boasted that these were discovered by the intuitional, in other words, entirely subjective imagination, by the intuitional powers of more highly endowed minds. We're smarter than you, don't you know? Look at my big brain. They constructed systems of speculation on subjects entirely beyond the range of human knowledge. I did a show on this last night on my channel, which is a part one of a series where I'm introducing Gnosticism as a foundation. It's called Nonsense. And this will be a really good introduction for people who are unfamiliar with Gnosticism. So that'll be an ongoing series for the next little while on my channel.
I'll remember as well to put that in the links after. Maybe I can throw it in the chat. But I did listen to it last night, and Lloyd speaks at such a nice, easy cadence that at 1.5, it's easy to listen to, FYI.
Yeah, that's what I do. I listen at 1.75. So it's called Nonsense, the Fundamentals of Nonsensicism. So if anyone is interested. So yeah, it's basically it's the fundamentals and the history of nonsense.
Okay,
So
good.
yeah, that should be interesting for people. All right, now within the Bible, it states very clearly, and I'm not here to act as a theologian, that nothing is secret. We don't have any secret knowledge, but the Gnostics claim that there is. I said nothing in secret, but the Gnostics claim that Jesus provided secret knowledge. The early church fathers were heavily against this. I want to forewarn you not to get snagged on the hooks of worthless opinions, but instead fully convinced about the birth and suffering of the resurrection of Jesus. That's Ignatius 35 to 108. Justin Martyr. These persons are ignorant of the whole work of God, of the genesis and formation of man, and why the things in the world were made. These are all, in fact, the New Testament and possibly the entire book of John are entire refutations of the Gnostics. The Gnostics occurred very early on, and they were a serious problem for the church. Now, if his death be denied because of the denial of his flesh, there will be no certainty of his resurrection. So if Christ's resurrection be nullified, ours also is destroyed. Tertullian and Irenaeus, these men overthrow the faith of many, drawing them away under a pretense of knowledge. So the early church fathers, early writings, and I'm not going to get too much into this. Okay, so
can I just add something here,
yeah.
Lloyd, as well? So for the Catholics listening to this, when you go to the traditional Mass, at the end of the Mass anyway, you'll listen to the last Gospel, which was a tradition that was added in around the 1200s. And the reason is because at that time there was a resurgence of the Albigensian Manichaean Cathar heresy, which is a very diabolical form of Gnosticism. And the reason is because they denied the incarnation. So that's why when you listen to the first chapter of John read by the priest after the Mass is finished, at the end of the Mass, he reads it on the left side, on the Gospel side. And when it says, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, Catholics kneel to that. And the reason is because we recognize that the divinity of Christ is in the human person of Christ. So like that God himself actually became man. And the reason why they instituted this kneeling was because you only kneel for God, right? So in that sense. So when you're kneeling, you're recognizing that the divinity was with the humanity. Okay, I'm not going to get into the whole monophysite and whatever monophysite stuff about the mingling. I'm just saying
you don't have to.
Yeah, but it's the recognition that the incarnation happened. So this was a weeding out thing of the Albigensians because they wouldn't kneel. And that's why we do that to this day. So it's a tragedy that it's been lost as the Mass was reformed, because now there's not this clear teaching against Gnosticism in the Mass. So anyway, that's a little qualification.
Actually, so you know what I'm going to do? I am going to skip ahead before I come back to this slide.
Sure.
So there's something that I think would be best that I do first. So this. Okay, so the Council of Nicaea, as everyone knows, is where Constantine, the Jews, and the Christians got together to decide how they were going to carve up the world after they beheaded everybody using the 7 laws of Noah from the Talmud.
Okay, yes, exactly.
So I say this in jest, but everyone should be aware. I tend to make very dry jokes, and I use a great deal of sarcasm on my channel. And I discovered today that a PhD scholar of Egyptian history, a legitimate PhD scholar, who has a YouTube channel, claimed that I was KJV only, and that I claimed that Jesus gave 11 copies of the King James Version of the Bible to the apostles, and therefore the King James Version Bible was in the world at the time that Jesus was still on earth, so that the apostles would know, and that I am a whack job for saying this. He may not have known, but I was laughing hysterically at the time, and it's a running joke I've been having on my channel for the last month about. So I have no idea. And in fact, I have said things like that polytheism is the worship of parrots. I have stated that the flight out of Egypt was with the Jews packed into flying pyramids, which were flown by a man called Pontius the Pilate.
Okay.
So I sincerely hope he's not telling people on his Discord channel that I believe that Pontius the Pilate flew pyramids. With a PhD, I'm not sure how you can't recognize humor and sarcasm, but he succeeded.
Well, Lloyd, two things. One, Brad Price in the chat says, and this man has the secret knowledge, we can tell. He says, this is why the conspirators want people barefoot and pregnant. Shoes equal knowledge. It all makes sense. There you go. And also, but also one more thing. One time I was at a wedding, and I was sitting beside a woman who was there by herself, and she asked what I did. I was a Catholic educator. And she basically said, oh, are you Catholic because your parents, or is it your choice? And I was like, hey, this is a weird conversation. And then she went on to say that she was doing her PhD in feminism in comedy. So you can get a PhD in basically everything. So it doesn't really mean much.
All right. Okay, so the Nicene Creed was created in response to heresy. That's the takeaway from this. Right. We believe in one God against the Gnostics. The Father, the Almighty, against the Gnostics, who believe that the Lord God is effectively Satan, the maker of heaven and earth, against the Gnostics, and of all that is seen and unseen, against the Gnostics. We believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only Son of God. These statements were deliberately written to refute specific heresies: eternally begotten of the Father against the Arians, and adoptionism, eternally begotten, not adopted by the Father, God from God, light from light, against the Arians, begotten not made, against the Arians, of one being, not a created being, in other words, which is what Muslims believe, of one being with the Father, against the Arians. Through him all things were made, against the Gnostics and the Arians, right? So by the power of the Holy Spirit, he was born of the Virgin Mary and became man, against Docetism and Ebionism. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. That's against Docetism. He rose again against modalism. We believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, against the pneumatomachians, or the spirit fighters. So understand, this creed is specifically written to refute heresies. Right. Exactly. Let me go back to where we were.
Also, ladies and gentlemen, one day I'm going to figure out how to be an expert on this software, and I'll have a nice little setup with our faces to the side, and I won't have to move it around. But if I'm moving this around, it's because I want it to not be in the way of his slide.
Okay, so let's have a look. Gnostics, they felt that the female-male distinction is a corruption. So understand, without going into all the details, this harks back to the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, right? So the distinction between men and women should be rejected because it is part of the useless creation order. So androgyny is ideal, a synthesis of male and female. In the Gospel of Thomas, when you make the male and the female one and the same, so that the male not be male, nor the female female, then you will enter the kingdom. Let's have a look at that full quote from Surah number 114, right, of the Gospel of Thomas, which is interesting because the Quran is 114 chapters. In fact, the people say surahs in the Quran, right? We use the word surah, and we, in English, we translate it as chapter. A better translation is actually the word degree.
Ah.
Quran is 114 degrees. Sound familiar?
Yeah, sounds like climate change.
Degrees. Yeah, there's also a little thing that has 33 of them. Oh, can never think of what it is, but right.
It's 33 degrees centigrade on a hot day in July. It's all coming together.
All right. Simon Peter said to him, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." This gives us an overview of what at least some Gnostic groups believed about women. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, of course, in Deuteroscopy, right, 22:5 in the Mosaic Law, we have a woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear women's clothing, for the Lord your God detests anyone who does this. Right, so this is really antithetical to the biblical teaching. Yes?
Well, if you look into the history of feminism, you'll find these pictures from, I've seen them. I can't pull them up right now, but I remember researching this. And women always wore dresses and skirts, and there were actual reasons for that. It's not just fashion or whatever. Before the advent of the feminine paper products that you get at the drugstore, there were reasons of cleanliness I won't go into, but there's actually an interesting, I guess, a little testimony documentary thing from this woman. She's an American girl who did a year of dressing like the 1700s. She's like she works at a colonial era museum. So her and her colleagues decided to actually dress in those clothes for 1 year. And she actually remarked that the fashions were so much more pleasing to her or useful as a woman because they were all built with this understanding that you would have fluctuations of weight, because women just generally, especially even without childbirth, they have fluctuations of weight because of retaining water, different cycles in the month, and so on and so forth. And for those times in the month when that certain thing would arrive, they had an ability to sort of keep themselves clean and fresh. And that's what those clothes were actually for. There was a reason they didn't wear pants. It had nothing to do with oppression or whatever. It was a functional thing. And then when the feminist movement, the suffragette movement, which was one and the same, it was just disguised, when they got together, what they would do is they would go out saying they wanted the vote, and they would wear pants, like workmen's pants of men under their skirts, ironically still bring the skirts on top. So even the push to have women wear men's clothing was rooted in feminism.
Actually, let me see. Okay, the entire concept of feminism actually dates back to pre-BC Rome. You can actually trace that idea all the way back to Rome. So
I believe you.
You don't have to. It's not just. Yeah, the whole idea was, in fact, ridiculed in literature written in the 4th century BC. So the idea of feminism was already ridiculed back then because women had insane demands back then already. So let me close that. Let me go back to where I was.
St. Augustine has something too about laughing about the priests of this weird religion where they would walk around and they would tuck their situations in between their legs, wear makeup, and act like women.
All right. So, for instance, we've got John Lennon here. You need to move us over again. The only true Christians were the Gnostics, who believe in self-knowledge, i.e. becoming Christ themselves, reaching the Christ within. John Lennon. Understand, this idea has made its way into our culture, it has made its way into the church as well, especially within the Protestant churches. I'm not saying that it has not affected, and it has, even the Catholic Church, but
Yes.
this has definitely weaseled its way into the popular culture. All right, so the perpetual enemy of faith is that in true God is not atheism, the claim that there is no God, but rather Gnosticism, the claim that God is known, that these people have a direct personal connection to the Holy Spirit. In fact, we'll hear this all the time, people saying, I read my Bible and the Holy Spirit talks to me. And therefore, me and the other 5 million people that do that, we all have utterly contradictory theologies and we cannot agree because we all interpret this differently because we're all hearing the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
The two spiritual powers of gnosis and magic, masquerading under the cloak of religion, threaten more than any other powers the insight into the religious reality. And so this is in an interesting book called Against the Protestant Gnostics. It's a really fascinating book. I will cover this one day on my channel. This is well worth discussing at some point. Okay, so let's go have a look at the numerous references to Gnosticism in the most famous of the Islamic law texts called the Reliance of the Traveler. This is the most famous and most common Islamic law manual. So you can download a copy, go to my channel, go to any description box, look for Reliance of the Traveler. You'll notice here the word gnosis occurs 18 times, Gnostic 5 times, Gnostics apostrophe 3 times, and of course the word Gnostics with apostrophe once. Let's go have a look at NOG. They speak here of the spiritual station of annihilation in Gnostic vision. That's when your soul is, you give up your identity and merge with the monad. The monad, of course, is called Albert. I revealed that last night on my channel. Explained to people that we now have a name for the monad.
Okay.
Although the literature is slightly unclear, he may also be called Cecil. But I just thought I would share that with you.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Clear that up. We're good.
You're very welcome. So they're speaking of Gnostic vision. They speak here of stopping at the first traces of gnosis. They speak here of others, non-Muslims, those other lame-ass, pardon my French, non-Muslims have attained, they claim to have attained to gnosis and the contemplative knowledge of the divine and have reached nearness to Allah. Allah can only be truly known through the gnosis. Then we go here, it tells us we Muslims, we have attained to gnosis. We have discovered the gnosis, not those other wannabes that claim. The Gnostic, they speak here of the Gnostic. The Gnostic's spiritual will exalted above all else. Now notice, it is will, not logos, because Islam is will, not logos.
Did you ever read Candide by Voltaire?
No, but Voltaire was a pretty reprehensible, immoral, disgusting
guy.
He was sleeping with his brother's child.
Yeah, he was disgusting. Well, little inside baseball, the permanent instruction of the Alta Vendita, which was a document that was leaked by the Carbonari, which was a black Masonic, secretive order in Italy. It was published by the Pope after they found it. But in any case, they said the ultimate thing we want is that of Voltaire. Right? They wanted that to be the driving philosophy of the revolution in the church and in society. But if you read Candide by Voltaire, I had to read it in a French course I did. I call the course How to Be an Atheist, because that's pretty much what it was in university. We were reading Camus and Voltaire and all these atheist thinkers, Sartre, who was reprehensible as well. And but in the end of Candide, it's like written by a 12-year-old who has it's like if a man had a high education in literature but had the conscience of a 12-year-old. It's like all basically bathroom humor making fun of the church. And at the end of the book, after this weird journey through all these religious experiences, it ends with sort of a moment of culmination and peace, and he finds himself in Turkey witnessing the whirling dervishes. And sort of this is the culmination to the finding of the truth. And this is, I think that's Sufi, isn't it?
So again, what is that? The culmination of the will?
Like the whirling dervishes. The culmination of his search was found with
Sufi,
the whirling
correct,
dervishes. Yeah.
That's correct.
So that just shows you what you need to know there.
Yeah. So, yeah, Voltaire wanted a social religion, but that's a very complex issue. I won't discuss Voltaire in length. I have a talk called The Cult of Reason, Atheism, the Cult of Reason, which is Atheism or Death, the Atheist Cult of Reason on my channel. And you can learn about that. Voltaire was a pretty reprehensible fellow, right? And but yeah, Voltaire was just all over the place in his beliefs. But let's continue with this. Time is of
Yep.
limited availability. The Muslims will pass through the door of gnosis. They have the true gnosis, Gnostic inspiration, the mukashafa, right? And it says here that they mention here that perfection in the latter sense is the mark of the elect. See, the elect amongst them will be able to reach perfection within the religion. So this is something that is available only to the Sufis because they
Yeah.
have the true knowledge of Islam. So hopefully that gives you an insight into, that's not the only source, but that's just a source as an example, right? So now Islam saves us from the Jahiliyyah, the condition of ignorance. So therefore Islam is the opposite of the Jahiliyyah, right? So let me see what else. Okay, now within Islam, you have a spiritual elite and you have the lay Muslims. In fact, lay Muslims follow what they call Islam for the masses, and Islam is divided into two divisions and four levels. Lay Muslims are at the very bottom level, the lowest possible level, and which means you are at an even lower level. Saves that. But you have the ulama, the term denoting scholars of the religious sciences. They are the guardians and the transmitters and interpreters of religious knowledge and of Islamic doctrine and law, embracing those who fulfill religious functions in the community that require expertise in religious and judicial issues. So this is well above the pay grade of the lay Muslim. And interestingly, within the Encyclopedia of Islam, which is this $40,000 gold standard work on Islam, academic work on Islam, the ulama have long been seen as a permanent government behind the changing dynasties. In other words, these guys have always been in the background working behind the governments. That's something that they claim. These men
Yes.
of secret knowledge.
So when people talk about, I mean, we'll get into Freemasonry. You know, people talk about it started in 1717. Well, definitely a lodge was formed in England that was 1717, and that was really fundamental. But this Gnostic underpinning to this idea, because you have to understand, if you're going to have a secret society, you have a secret society because you believe you have something that other people don't have. I mean, that's the basis of a secret society. This is why you have to be initiated into these rings within rings within rings of influence that goes from this sort of, centrifugal force outwards from this point of knowledge that only the select few people have. And you find this spirit behind all of the Gnostic movements, and you find it in all the Gnostic religions. So you find it in Islam. You do find it in Kabbalah, which you can find in both Islam and Judaism. You find it with Christian heresies. You find it everywhere where there's basically a move away from objective truth towards something that is secretive.
Right. Okay. Let's have a look at Gnostic syncretism and plagiarism. For instance, in one of the older Gospels of Muhammad, we can say, his Sira, or traditions, or not traditions, the biographies as they commonly call him, they speak of, it is recorded that Allah made a tree with 4,000 branches and called it the tree of life. Then he created the light of Muhammad. See, so in the beginning, the light of Muhammad was with God and he was God,
Yes.
right, effectively speaking. And it praised Allah for 70,000 years. And I covered that at length in our show last week where we discussed Muhammad as Jesus, right? So Gnosticism is a cult of special knowledge. Now, there is a belief in Islam in a remote, unknowable, supreme, absolute one deity called the monad, or the Tawheed. Now, the Tawheed, oddly enough, is a term that is taken from the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. They actually took this from a Christian term, which is really, really odd. So they've actually borrowed this. This is when, during the first Hijrah, the first Exodus for the Muslims, that's when they date their calendar from, the Hijrah. When they left Mecca for Medina, they went, for 15 years, they went to Ethiopia, right? There is no differentiation in the monad. The monad is beyond human thought, and human thought cannot reach it. It is beyond comprehension. And this is Allah within Islam. The divine monad is beyond the material, and it is also beyond the rational world. There is nothing rational about it. It is what they call post-rational. You must enter into a pre-rational or post-rational state using rituals, incantations through forms of magic. You have to detach yourself from your rational mind to see Allah. So Allah does not enter the dirty physical realm. Thus, the Christian incarnation is unacceptable because Allah cannot come into earth. Think about it. Allah cannot enter creation. Now, this, of course, conflicts with stories in the Quran where Allah enters the burning bush and one other story. But even so, Muslims will say Allah comes only to the lowest heaven. He does not come to earth, right? So, and also there's the polemic emphasis in Islam on Jesus as a baby being extremely unclean. We'll talk about that. Okay. For instance, in Ibn Qayyim's Guidance to the Uncertain, in reply to the Jews and the Nazarenes, a religion whose structure is founded on the worship of crosses and pictures on the ceilings and walls, proclaiming that the Lord descended from the chair of his glory and became attached to the inside of a woman's womb, dwelled in there for a period of time amidst the location where the sexual organs join. Then he came out as suckling, growing up, gradually crying, eating, drinking, urinating, sleeping, and playing with other children. Then he was slapped on the cheeks by the Jews. Okay, and then they'll say that he descended from the authority of his greatness and throne and entered the vagina of a woman who eats, drinks, urinates, evacuates her bowels, and menstruates. He got attached to the inside of her abdomen, dwelled there for 9 months, wobbling between excrement, urine, and menstrual blood. Then he was born to be swaddled, put in the cradle, and each time he cried, his mother breastfed him. Then he went to the maktab alongside other boys, and he ended up being slapped on the cheeks by the Jews. And yeah, he was in the place of the monthly period and of menstrual discharges for several months. Now understand, blood, feces, and urine are the most foul, dirty things which can actually lose you your salvation in Islam. If they touch you, they can actually make you extremely unclean. He came out from the vagina, suckling her breasts and crying, eating, drinking, urinating. You see? Then he made a plot against his archenemy, Satan, by giving himself away to his enemies, the Jews, who arrested him and drove him to 2 slabs of wood to crucify him. And there's worse. There's much worse than that. But these are just to give an insight. Now, I will notice there are people in your comment section who I would, to use a scientific term, are not very intelligent. Okay? They'll say, oh, Lloyd, you should now do the Talmud. Look, I'll be very blunt to these commenters. I know the Talmud far better than you ever will. Let me be very clear about that. I have a lengthy 7-part series on the Talmud. Okay? It covers, 14 hours at least. So understand, most Jews have no idea who Jesus is. They've never heard of him. There's no New Testament that he sold to Jews in the Bible in Israel, right? 2, the whole point of Islam is a denial. The entire point of Islam is a denial of Christianity. That book I just read from is the most popular polemic. It's 800 years old. It's the most popular polemic against Christianity in Islam. It is still read and still popular today. When you go through the Talmud, which is like 12 million sentences or something, I would say 0.0000001% of the Talmud has any reference to Jesus. And it is exaggerated, whereas in Islam, half of Islamic texts are written explicitly to denigrate, insult, deny Christianity. So I'll leave it at now. But
let me just add there, people, the stuff that he just read there. Think how vile it is. I mean, as a Catholic, the Virgin Mary is very important to me. And I think the Virgin Mary is probably very important to Jesus. And, that's obvious. And are there differences, obviously, between Christianity and Judaism? Yes. Am I here advocating that there's a dual covenant, that we deny the church's teaching? No. But it's a historical fact that when you look into the basis of Islam as compared to a lot of the Talmudic literature, obviously there's going to be animosity. But the root, the whole point of these literatures is a vile repudiation of the most sacred things to Christians in detail. And that is just something that is steeped throughout.
No, look, these people are simply repeating Martin Luther, who was a vile, disgusting, immoral man I would put at the same level as Adolf Hitler. Right. In fact, Martin Luther was simply Muhammad with German characteristics. He was a proto-Nazi. He was simply repeating the same things, the same accusations that Hitler made, which he got from Martin Luther. You have no idea that you're exaggerating one thing. In fact, so many of these common stories are exaggerated, distorted. In fact, there's one story that people tell about Jesus went to Egypt, and then in Egypt he became a witch, and then he came back and he did black magic. And people go, see, the Talmud, they hate Jesus. Yeah, that story is written between 100 and 200 BC, as far as I know. So I don't know, Jesus didn't live 100 to 200 BC, so maybe they're talking about the name Jesus, which is a very common name referring to someone else. Everyone lies about the Talmud. I've done a very detailed series on that, and seriously, so I'm just going to assume that these people are indoctrinated, they are repeating lies because they don't know any better, or they are just choosing to lie. But let's look at the Islam today, right?
Sure.
The prayer of the Nazarenes, that's the Christians, ridicules the worship deity. The Christians chose a way of prayer during which the most devoted and ascetic amongst them would consider it no great matter if he happens to pass urine dripping on his thighs and legs, right? During church, okay? If he would literally take a pee while praying in church, right? Then he would face the east, make the sign of the cross, and worship the crucified deity by saying it, and so on. Okay, and then he would turn to his neighbor and discuss mundane matters like the price of wine or pork in church while sitting during the mass, who won in gambling, what dish he prepared at home, and then alike. And then he would interrupt his prayer to talk about similar things, and then the Christian would urinate in his seat if he can. Okay? Now, on this point, they talk about the Talmud, and they say, oh, they say that Jesus was fathered by a Roman called Dickus, and,
Wasn't it
that is
Pantera or
blasphemy.
something? Pantera or something?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Well, the fact is that story was created by the Romans. The Talmud simply records it. Understand? That story is created by the Romans. Now you've got hypocrites who will go, look what the Jews copied. Look what the Jews have written in the Talmud. And it's like, we love the Romans. The Romans are just fine. We're hypocrites because we don't criticize Romans for hating Jesus. No. Or killing them or throwing them into the Colosseum and killing them with lions. No, that's just fine. We love Romans. We're hypocrites. Look at us. We just hate Jews. So very bluntly, that's you. Okay, so notice they're saying we will urinate in our seats.
I gotta add. I have to confess. The other day, my 1-year-old daughter did urinate and defecate herself in church. I did take her out so we weren't unclean, and I changed her diaper in the family washroom just so everyone's clear. I just wanted to get that out of there, okay?
Yeah, look, these things make me extremely upset because these lies have gotten people killed. And you've got quote-unquote Christians spreading these same lies out of ignorance, and they are going to repeat that cycle, and they want to get people killed. And in fact, they're spreading Russian, Soviet, Nazi, and Islamic Muslim Brotherhood propaganda for free.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Okay, now notice, within the Sharia, you've got here, this world and what is in it are accursed. Now, this is within the Sharia. This is the highest law within Islam. This is the final understanding of the Quran. Right? This actually supersedes the Quran. So the world and what is in it is accursed. And this aligns exactly with the teaching of the Gnostics, that the world, and the only thing, right? So except for the remembrance of Allah and that which Allah loves, someone with sacred knowledge, someone with the gnosis. So, yeah. Okay. Now we've already discussed the Nicene Creed, right? Maybe I'll just skip over the actual, some of the specific Gnostic sects. Right? These are not that important. Excuse my bluntness, but I get really angry. Now, I want to mention something. I want to mention Plotinus. Now, let me see if I have the second portion of Plotinus. Okay, yes, I do. So now we're going to look at a template.
Very important.
Now we're going to look at a template for Allah. Now, of course, and also Muhammad. Okay, now you've got a proto-template, an early template. Muhammad seems to be syncretistic. He seems to be a composite of multiple different people. There may have been historical Muhammad, we don't really know. But we need to look at plagiarism from Plotinus, another Gnostic, Neoplatonic, from 204 to 270 AD. Plotinus was a pagan. His student Porphyry despised Christianity. His writings were widely read and accepted within Augustine of Hippo's time, 5th century, 200 years before Muhammad's first revelation. In his account, Vita Plotini, in Porphyry's account, Plotinus lived a divine life. He was more than an ordinary man, and he had a divine nature, and he possessed every possible virtue. He had the highest moral and spiritual standards. His teachings were regarded as a legitimate continuation of the Platonic tradition. He was a paradigm of philosophical perfection, and this is very close to how Muslims portray Muhammad. To him, phenomenon were poor image or mimicry, mimesis of something higher and intelligible, which is really just Plato's view of the theory of the true forms, or the true ideas, right? And Plotinus refused to have his portrait painted, as did Muhammad. It is illegal to draw Muhammad's image. This is a very odd parallel in history. This is a really rare parallel. Because, of course, if you're a Gnostic, you are ashamed of matter. You're ashamed of being in a body. right? And Plotinus developed a spiritual cosmology involving three foundational elements called the One, the intelligence, which in Islam is the hikmah. The hikmah derives from, of course, Hermes Trismegistus, who is the father of Hermeticism, who is also Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom and the Egyptian god of a bunch of other things. And he's also the Egyptian god Hermes and the Roman god Mercury. So you've got now, and according to the Abbasid tradition, Hermes Trismegistus, who is very much integral to beliefs like Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy and so on, as part of the occult tradition of the West from the 18th and 19th centuries and so on. This guy is the ancestor of Muhammad. And he brought the hikmah of Islam, which is the occult knowledge. And so let's have a look at this, okay? Augustine countered the thoughts of Plotinus on the city of God against the pagans, the Civitate Dei contra Paganos, right? Let's have a look. He was more than just an ordinary man, right? And did have something more by birth when compared to others. And if you read these stories of Muhammad's birth, they are, I mean, they just, he is Jesus for all intents and purposes, plus one, Jesus plus one. Plotinus seemed like one who felt ashamed of being in a body, and painters and sculptors were unendurable to him. When Emilius begged him to have a portrait done of himself, said, "It is not enough to carry the image that nature has put about me." Right, so this is a very unusual alignment with Muhammad. Now let's look at his version of Allah, or God, the One. So let's look at Yahweh, the One, and Allah. In terms of sovereignty, God is a creator, the One is a creator, Allah is a creator God. In terms of nature, a single being with a complex nature, whereas the One is a simple unity beyond being, and Allah is a simple unity of pure will. However, Allah is actually a compound of both of these. We know already Allah is beyond will, beyond Allah's will, and Allah is beyond reason, beyond being, undescribable in human terms. In action, God is intrinsic, but the One is extrinsic and Allah is extrinsic. He doesn't come to the world. You have to accept Muhammad to embrace Allah. You cannot embrace Allah without embracing Muhammad. Can he be known through reason and faith? But the One is knowable only through complete submission, Islam, to submit. And Allah is inscrutable, can't be known. Allah is both of these. Allah is actually both of these. Man's nature is free. The One, you're a slave. To Allah, you're a slave. As a basis for obedience, you love God and you serve God. In the One, mysticism, and Allah, fear. However, you saw that the mysticism is an element of the leaders of Islam, the highest echelon, the highest ranks, the Sufis, the major scholars of Islam. They worship Allah through mysticism, the lower ranks through fear. Man's will has free will, whereas, unless you're a Calvinist, or Lutheran in fact, in imposing one's will on another, and predestination. And in fact, you've also got jihad, which is the imposition of your will on another, which is also valid for Allah. And you must know your creator. We can know God through reason and faith, whereas in the One, you submit. And of course, in Allah, you submit. Same thing. And the only one that is the day of his resurrection, they don't speak about it here. But otherwise, the two are a complete match. It's a Gnostic Allah. In fact, it's a Neoplatonic Allah. And in fact, don't forget that when you look at the resurrection of Platonic thought, or rather Aristotelian thought in the High Middle Ages, it was the Muslims who had retained much of this knowledge, these documents, and then they returned to Europe. So they already had this, except most of the time they had a corrupted version of this, a Neoplatonic version of Plato and Aristotle, not the originals necessarily. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, that's if you read through St. Thomas Aquinas, he constantly talks about Avicenna, Averroes, and Maimonides, Muslim and Jewish scholars at the time. And he points to the Muslim ones and shows, here's a piece where he's basically correct, but here's how he corrects him because they had gone into error in their understanding of Aristotle. And also, should be noted that a lot of the time liberal scholars, and I was taught this in university, the golden age of civilization was Muslim Spain, because the Spanish Muslims and the Spanish Jews and the Spanish Catholics all lived in perfect harmony. It was like a John Lennon song. And they'll say, look, the Muslims gave us all of these advancements in the Middle Ages, and they don't tell you that when you go deeper into the records that essentially they were maintaining Christian thought. And a lot of the time, they employed Christians as their philosophers and mathematicians in order to do this, and then they transmit it as if it was part of the caliphate or whatever.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, notice that if you go back to the Islamic the Encyclopedia of Islam, they speak of madhab. Technically, they shouldn't really be called madhabs, because people say, well, which madhab, which school of thought, right? It's actually a school of fiqh, right? But madhab is a way of thinking, a way of persuasion, right? The 5 schools of law, one of those being, of course, the Jafari school of Shia Islam. And they speak of the Madhab al-Hadarat, the name for the Platinian scheme of dynamic emanation. Now, why would, under the madhabs, under the schools of thought in Islam, the 4 major schools of Sunni Islam, would they happen to have a term of art for the Platinian scheme of dynamic emanation, which is the monad emanating creation? Or rather, shall we say, Albert, mindlessly emanating things.
Well, and evolutionism is also very much based on this doctrine of emanation.
Right. So understand, this term, Hadra, is presence, okay? The school of the presence, or the way of thinking about the presence. So they're thinking on the monad. So why would Islam have it as part of their term of their scholars to be thinking upon the presence of the monad, being in the presence of Allah? The Hadra, the Platinian scheme of emanation, is being in the presence of Allah. Allah is the monad. Do you see the connection starting to form here?
Nothing to do with Islam, though. Come on, let's relax here.
Yeah, and they speak of the ghaib, what is hidden, what is inaccessible to the senses and to reason. This is why Gnostics don't follow reason, because what they do is inaccessible to the senses, right? And so therefore they have to be in a pre-rational, post-rational state, the world beyond discursive reason. It's mystic, it's gnosis, it is occult. Understand? You start to see these terms stack up. Yeah. Okay, so there's plenty of talk about Gnostics and Gnosticism that goes on there. So I'm going to have to jump ahead in the interest of time. Okay, so let me actually see what. So I'll run through this quickly, and I'll highlight certain portions as I. So you see, the Christians, okay, we mix up falsehood. Now you must understand that in Islam, Christianity is the Deen al-Batil. The word used for falsehood is batil, which means something that is unsound and worthless. You see, do not mix up Judaism and Christianity with Islam. We are not the same religion, because they say we are the religions of falsehood. We are the Deen al-Batil. Al-Batil means unsound, worthless, in vain. The false, Batil, is also one of the names of Satan. So we are the religions of Satan. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
that's what Islam says. So therefore, we cannot be of the same religion, and they profess to be. I believe, actually, I may be within Vatican II's document. It says that Muslims profess to be of the religion of Abraham. It doesn't say they are of. Yes. It says Muslims say they are.
Yes.
That doesn't affirm that they are. That just says that they claim to be.
And they say they adore the one God, the one true God, which is ambiguous. But
they say they do. Yeah, it doesn't say that they are. Okay. Okay, so now I need to have a look at, so let's have a look at this. Ahruf, Muslims talk about the ahruf, a Quranic reading, a dialect, a word, but it also means the ilm al-huruf, onomatomancy, a magical practice based on the occult properties of the letters of the alphabet and the divine and angelic names which they form. All right, so now we learn about that. So let's jump ahead to the full definition here. Ahruf, this is now when you go through the small definitions within the Encyclopedia of Islam of ahruf, a very common term to describe the Islamic versions of the Quran, they will give you short definitions, like one paragraph for these versions, but for these terms. But when you get to this one, there's like several pages. The science of letters, onomatomancy, a magical practice, Samiya, white magic. It's known as letter magic or word magic. You would think of it as NLP, neuro linguistic programming. It is verbal. What would you call it? It is verbal magic designed to persuade, right? Occult properties of the letters of the alphabet, arithmomancy, gematria based on alchemy. The 28 letters of the Arabic alphabet are divided into 4 categories of 7 letters: air, fire, earth, and water letters. The fire letters, air letters, the water letters, the earth letters, and the lunar and the solar letters. We covered that last week, okay? And it says you combine letters so as to obtain a whole possessing particular properties, and an esoteric character is attached. So the Quran is used as a device to do ritual spells to basically take you out of your mind and connect you to the gnosis, directly to Allah. They speak of astrological and theurgical factors. Theurgical factors is basically summoning spirits and summoning demons. And then to understand the mystery is to penetrate the divine intelligence, is to understand the mystery of the Holy Spirit, the Huruf. And these sciences were practiced by the greatest spirits of humanity, such as Hermes Trismegistus, Idris. Idris is Hermes Trismegistus, the Greek god Hermes, but also the Egyptian god Thoth, Plato. they've been attributed to Aristotle two works. Okay, so they speak of these, so they know these sources. So understand, does that make some sense, Kennedy?
Yep. It's all coming together.
Okay, so we've got that. We'll skip over this. I don't have to go too much. Now, Hermes. Okay, Hermes is Hermes Trismegistus, that strange god incarnate, the Hellenistic name of the Egyptian god Thoth. Hermes Trismegistus passed his capacities into Islam. It is true, Islam transformed the god into one of the heroes of the olden times, who according to his name Trismegistus is Mutalab al-Hikmah, the one who brought the secret knowledge into Islam, the wisdom. He is Idris, he's Enoch as well, and he built the pyramids. And they say there are books containing, and yeah, he built the pyramids.
Oh, the
and they speak of the
pyramids.
prophets.
The aliens built them. Come on, Lloyd.
Yeah. But understand, so look, this is just a very rough overview just to give you an idea of what's in the Islam. But you're talking about these ideas have made their way into Islam, and thus they become Islamic. So he's a precursor of Muhammad. He actually is an arithmomancy. Now, again, you're going back to the magic within Islam, right? So now you're talking about, okay, so how the Muslim scholars of the classical and medieval period, how that Idris and Hermes Trismegistus were the same person. Idris is the second prophet mentioned in the Quran. See? So now this ancestor of Muhammad is a pagan god. So understand how odd, how weird this gets. Okay? Now notice this secret knowledge, what they say here is that the science par excellence is that which derives from Muhammad. All the rest is useless science, or does not deserve to be called science. Numerous prophetic traditions on the study of science concern only religious knowledge. So this is not science as we know it. This is occult religious science, right? We've already covered some of this, and we mentioned this last week, so I don't think I have to go through this, but these are the two divisions and the four levels of Islam, and the lowest one is here. The highest one is the Haqa'iq, reality, truth, divine essence. This is the Muhammadan reality. Muhammad is the highest reality. The universe is created from the spirit of Muhammad, the light of the sun, the light of paradise. Allah's throne is lit up with the spirit of Muhammad. The Ruh Muhammad, the spirit of Muhammad, the Holy Spirit, transmits divine knowledge to the prophets and to the Sufi saints. When you look at who are the saints in Islam, the Sufis are the only saints in Islam. The Sufis are the highest within Islam. Okay? So let me see now. Let me run through. So any comments or questions so far?
No, it's nothing I can add. It's just, you ever watch Glenn Beck back in the day when he had his chalkboard and he would like link everything together? And anyway, this is like that, but it's all making sense.
Right. So we know that there's lots of Gnostic stories within Islam. Like, for instance, in the Quran, Jesus speaks as a baby in the cradle as one example.
Yeah.
Right. Now, this idea is taken from the Gnostic, the Arabic infancy gospel of the Savior.
Isn't
and you've got Jesus making clay birds.
Yeah. Isn't that said about the Buddha too? Like he got up and talked and walked or something as a baby, I think. Anyway.
I believe that may be the case. So Islam has borrowed a number. In fact, their Christology is entirely Gnostic and can be traced to the Arabic infancy gospel and so on. So you can find the entire Christology is completely Gnostic. And in fact, even with Mary, that whole idea comes from like the Proto-Evangelium of James, right? Mm-hmm. So you get all of these things, and Jesus speaks in the cradle and so on. I want to go to some other things, so I just want to run through this a little faster. We've already spoken about this, okay? Now, this is the official statement. I must do this before I jump to the KKK and to so on, which will be the last section, but this is the official statement from the Sharia. This is the highest law of Islam. There is nothing higher, right? This is the very final orthodoxy of Islam on their view of Christianity and Judaism. This is section W4.0, the finality of the Prophet's message. This section has been translated to clarify some possible confusions among Muslims as to Islam's place amongst world religion. Previously revealed religions were valid in their own eras as attested by the Quran, but were all abrogated by the universal message of Islam as is equally attested by the Quran. Okay? Both points are worthy of attention from English-speaking Muslims who are occasionally exposed to erroneous theories affirming these religions' validity, but denying or not mentioning their abrogation. Remember, we are the Din al-Batil, the religions of Satan, the worthless religions of Satan. God doesn't even hear us. When we pray, when we speak to God, our words fall like dust at our feet, according to them. Or that it is unbelief, it is kufr, which is a capital punishment, to hold that the remnant cults, now bearing the names of formerly valid religions, such as Christianity or Judaism, are acceptable to Allah after he sent Muhammad. This is a matter over which there is no disagreement among Islamic scholars. This is called the ijma, or the consensus. Islam does have an orthodoxy. It's called the ijma, the consensus. Scholarly, so basically, the only reason that a Muslim can doubt this is that a scholarly Quranic exegesis or tafsir to explain the accord between the Quranic verses and the agreement with the Sunnah has not been given to him. Islam is the final religion that Allah will never lessen or abrogate.
So this is an interesting two things I want to link here. So for one, this person, I think they said it kind of as a joke, but it makes sense, by the light of Muhammad's mother's private parts. Like, so how do they think Muhammad was made? Was Muhammad made like without a mother and father in the tradition?
Say again, please.
Was Muhammad made without a mother and father? Because if the idea is that Christ is unclean because he was, in human parts, then wouldn't the same thing apply to Muhammad?
So in Islam, Muhammad was born. When Muhammad was born, a light shone out of his mother's vajayjay, 1,300 kilometers all the way from where she was in Mecca, to light up the castles in Busra, Syria. Okay, so there was a light in his father that was shining out of his forehead that everyone saw, and then when Muhammad was conceived, that light disappeared, and it was inside Muhammad's mother. And when he was born, there were multiple signs: lakes drained, fires went out, buildings cracked, there were earthquakes. The earth cracked open, there were locusts, flood, there was blood in the rivers. People fell into holes of fire, and over the rest of California, though, it'll be fine to mild with calm weather. But
okay.
Yeah, so basically Muhammad had an entirely miraculous birth. So that's the story of Muhammad's birth. He, and the angel came and spoke to his mother. So there's a whole story about that. But understand, Islam explicitly states Christianity and Judaism are remnant cults that are false, that worship Satan, that are done, that have been replaced. There is no ecumenicism. There is no reconciling between the religions.
Okay, and then the next question is, somebody said, well, what you're saying here about an English-speaking world, basically a lot of Muslims are in error. This reminds me of this whole ridiculous Andrew Tate phenomenon. I cannot stand Andrew Tate. I did a video last year when he kind of had one of his waves of fame about why, you're a fool if you follow him. And most people were positive about it, but there was still some Catholic member like, really? In the culture war, you're going to go after this guy? Yes, I am going to go after the, human trafficking, pimp, pornographer, idiot, who's a murderer of souls, because he's getting a lot of men to convert to Islam. But if you listen to his words, he says, I truly believe, I'm going to try to do an Andrew Tate accent here. I truly believe there's a reality that many people can come to religion through different paths. I truly believe in that reality. There's morality in all religions. And but what he's saying isn't even Muslim.
No, correct. No, the Sharia is the final arbiter. It supersedes the Quran.
Yeah. Okay.
So now that section's done. I've covered that. So now we can go straight into the stuff that people paid tickets for.
Let's get into the good stuff, Lloyd. Come on, bring it on.
Yeah. But hopefully, did that all make sense to give us a bit of a background,
sense.
Even though I had to rush and butcher it slightly?
No, it's perfect. Listen, you didn't butcher it. Listen, Lloyd, your slides, I listened to your whole series on monotheism with Sam. It's 5 episodes, and it's amazing. You hammer home, and it's not superfluous. You do it to make sure that no stone can be left unturned for the critics. But for the people that are watching this show, these people, obviously, they're giving you the benefit of the doubt. They believe you. So there's 50 more slides you could do, but what you've done is you've made the point. And if anyone has any problem with it, go watch the whole series and then send them an email and ask for clarification, but it's there. But we're making the point here so we can get to the next point.
Yeah. So here's where, so now look, I have a couple of pet peeves, okay? There's someone that contacted me after your show and they were speaking with me, and they're a lovely person otherwise, but they hate the Jews, they hate Israel, okay? So now people need to understand, in Islamic religion, it is a requirement that the Muslims murder every single Jew on earth. unless they do this, which is a holy order and a good thing, according to Allah and according to the Muslim belief, Muhammad will not come back. The eschatology, the eschaton, will not occur unless Muslims first murder every Jew on the planet. And then the end times will come. Jesus will come at the right hand of Muhammad as Muhammad's servant. Jesus prays behind Muhammad, right? He follows Muhammad in prayer because Jesus is a Muslim, right? Yeah. He's a faithful servant of Allah, and he follows Muhammad as his master. Jesus will come back. Jesus will kill all the Christians who refuse to convert to Islam, right? Jesus will murder all the Christians, that's you, who refuse to convert to Islam. And then Jesus will marry, have children, and die. And Muhammad will reign at the right hand of Allah ever and ever. Amen. Allah works in mysterious ways. Now, I detest people who want to tell me, well, do you know that the Jews, they shot a Palestinian yesterday? And I'm like, okay, hold on, let's get back to basics. You are aware that it is a requirement of Hamas, who is a wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, the world's largest secret society. Freemasons bad! The Muslim Brotherhood, this Muslim organization, is the largest secret society on the face of the planet.
It is.
Israel bad!
Yeah.
Freemasons bad! The Muslim Brotherhood is the largest secret society on the face of the planet. It dwarfs every other organization, and it is a terrorist organization, and Muslims are required to murder every Jew on earth as a religious holy duty. Israel shot a Palestinian. Are you okay with all Jews being murdered? And is it okay? Are you okay with that? I'm not here to talk theology. Okay, so do you understand it? And this is liberal Catholics. This is liberal Protestants. These people understand. I know the topic. First of all, most people are just lying about the Talmud. People are flat out lying about the Talmud. I've done the Talmud at length. I've read it more than you have, I'll bet. I know I make bold statements, but I really dislike the propaganda. Sorry, I'll leave it over to you for a moment.
I was going to say, ladies and gentlemen, I've had Father Maudsley on before, who he just wrote a 5-part series culminating of books, not articles, 5-part books, which are exceptional, culminating in the promised conversion of the Jews in the Old and the New Testament. So, and he is a traditional Catholic priest, and he is as orthodox and faithful on the doctrines of the Catholic Church, outside the church, no salvation, et cetera, et cetera. But he says explicitly that hatred for the Jews on behalf of Catholics is unbiblical, because you have to look at what, and the example he gives is Saint Stephen, who is martyred by the Jewish priests at the time, the Pharisees at the time, and he does not lift a finger, meaning he does not return like with like. If you believe there is a persecution, which of course there are historical animosities, and these things are a conversation for another day, there is no room for a genetic fallacy, a philosophical genetic fallacy of applying immutable characteristics to an entire group of people. This is just simply stupid. It's intellectually lazy, and it is not in the scriptures. Okay. So people need to, I find this sometimes in traditional Catholic circles, sadly, that on the one hand, they'll recognize the error of the religious claims of post-temple Judaism as opposed to Christianity, and then they'll apply this to basically getting into they get into a type of ethno-bigotry, which is not acceptable, because we have to believe all men are made in the image and likeness of God. So I think we've covered that, but that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah. So these are pet peeves of mine, right? So look, let's one quick diversion to Islamic law. This is the Sharia. You always hear, we want Sharia for Britain. We want Sharia in our town. We want Sharia in Hamtown. We want whatever. Permissible lying. This is in the Sharia. This is one of the chapters on permissible lying. Okay? When and how to lie. Chapter 8, teaching you how to lie. Let's go have a look here. Let's go have a look. He who settles disagreements between people to bring about good or says something commendable is not a liar. So when Muslims say we believe in Jesus and they don't want to have an argument, they have settled a disagreement. They've brought about peace and harmony, lying through their teeth to you, but according to Allah, that was good. That is not a lie. So you must understand this. It is obligatory, not optional. In Islamic law, it is obligatory for Muslims to lie to you, right? Now, Muhammad did not permit untruth except for 3 things: war and settling disagreements, and a man talking with his wife or she with him. So you can lie to your wife, and Islam is permanently at war. That is what jihad is. and settling disagreements. So when you have a debate with a Muslim, you're having a disagreement. Therefore, it is illegal for him to lie to you. This is an explicit statement that lying is permissible for a given interest. Speaking is a means to achieve objectives. This is the highest scholar in Islam after Muhammad himself, Abu Hamid Ghazali. And it says, when it is possible to achieve such an aim by lying, but not by telling the truth, it is permissible to lie if attaining the goal is permissible. When the purpose of lying is to circumvent someone who is preventing you from doing something permissible, that's me teaching you the truth about Islam, and therefore I am preventing them from spreading Islam. It is obligatory to lie if the goal is obligatory. So understand, I can go to another book which goes into even more detail on this, okay? But this is the most popular, the most common, the most owned, the most read Sharia manual in the world. Okay, it is not unlawful to lie when any of these aims can be attained only through lying. So, what implications does this have? Because this is Islamic. Islam, lying is obligatory. Who is the father of lies, Kennedy?
Donald Trump.
You know, even white lies are bad, Kennedy. Come on, try again.
Okay, it is Satan. Yep.
Yes. So understand, you've got people telling me stories about Islam, and they're listening to their nice Muslim friend who is lying through his teeth. Okay? So I just want to get that out the way. So war is a game of deceit. Oh my God, Mossad says that by way of deception, we will do war. Well, Muhammad beat them to it by hundreds and hundreds of years. Muhammad beat them to it by 1400 years. War is a game of deceit. All right? So, excellent. So now I'm going to jump straight into the good stuff. My apologies for the short diversion.
How dare you?
Okay.
Go on. Now, by the way, I have, Lloyd, just sorry, I have another 45 minutes myself. So yeah.
We will be good. Thank you very much for that. Okay. So we have a statement within Western doctrine that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But Islam says, do not let your enemy know he is your enemy. That's a statement that they make. I know this, but many people do not have my experience, have not been where I've been, and you have not seen what I have seen. Right, so therefore, so let's look at Hamas Charter, the Hamas Charter Article 2 and the occult. All right, Hamas, the Islamic resistance movement, is one of the wings of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine, which is the Muslim Brotherhood is a universal organization which constitutes the largest Islamic movement in modern times. It is characterized by its deep understanding of and accurate comprehension and its complete embrace of all Islamic concepts. They are responsible for the spreading of Islam, education, art, information, and the science of the occult and conversion to Islam. We must support Palestine because the Palestinians were huge fans of the Nazis, by the way.
Yep. They were.
Right. So yeah, but that's so understand, these people they will tell you openly, maybe you should believe them when they tell you who they are.
Yeah.
Right, now let's look at Baron Rudolf von Subottendorf. Tea time with Hitler. This is him here. This is Hitler looking very cowed. And this is the man with his 1,000-yard stare.
That guy looks like a wax figure. It's so creepy.
Yes. And look at the face on this dude. I mean, just look at his expression. There's something very odd there.
It looks like he should be on Epstein's Island.
There's something, and Hitler looks very nervous. Let's continue. Baron Rudolf von Subottendorf, who died in 1945, or maybe 1950, who knows, jumped off a bridge, slipped on a butter knife, who knows, was a Freemason and practitioner of alchemy. In 1900, he moved to Turkey, where he met the Jewish Temudi family. I love how they say Jewish Temudi family, because these are Muslims. They were Jewish maybe 100 years ago, who introduced him to Rosicrucianism and led to his initiation into a local Masonic lodge. He founded a lodge of the Bektashi Sufi order in Constantinople. Returns to Germany in 1917. He converts to Islam. Okay, that means he's a high-ranking Muslim scholar, right? He founded the Thule Society, an occult organization that was joined by Hitler and most of the prime Nazis of the day, of the German government. And the Thule Society became the meeting place and the organization that was then transformed into the Nazi Party. So the party was joined in 1918 or 1919 by Adolf Hitler, who transformed it into the Nazi Party. Subottendorf then left the Thule Society as it became increasingly political, according to this source, but no, there's a whole different reason why he left, but that's another story. Flees to Turkey. So this Sufi occultist and scientific racist. I will say that flat out. He creates an occult organization, a Sufi Muslim Freemason organization that becomes the Nazi Party. Because why? Because Hitler was a good Catholic,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So your thoughts on that before I go on?
We don't need to do the digression here because no one in my audience believes Hitler was a Christian. No one in my audience. If anyone in my audience believes he's a Christian, it's because this person's an idiot. But you do an excellent job on your channel, and everyone check it out. I'll link to Lloyd's stuff after I'm done here. I'll put it in the show notes. And he does talk about, with Sam Shamoun, about Hitler being a Christian. Were those with Sam as well?
With Sam, I did them on my channel, and on Sam's channel, I do even more detail. So I tend to update my slides on a regular basis. Go into significantly more detail on Sam's channel.
Yeah, you'll see it, and it's just ridiculous when they say Hitler was a Christian. It's absurd.
Yeah. So he writes here his most famous book, The Secret Practices of the Sufi Freemasons, the Islamic Teachings at the Heart of Alchemy by Baron Rudolf von Sobottendorf. Okay, I have a story on him on my channel. You can go and check that out. This book reveals the secret spiritual exercises of the Bektashi order of Sufis. It shows how this order, known as Oriental Freemasonry, preserves the ancient spiritual doctrines forgotten by modern Freemasonry. It explains how to transform the soul into the alchemical magnum opus by combining Masonic hand grips and the abbreviated letters of the Quran. Sobottendorf explains how the mysterious abbreviated letters found in the Quran represent formulas for perfecting the spirit, which is basically Gnostic rituals to merge you into the throne room of Allah, and you join with Allah. This is their version of communion. So they claim that they are the original Freemasons and that they infiltrated Freemasonry into the West through the Templars, because the Templars became Sufis, Muslims.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So now the Rosicrucians were a German secret society founded by a man supposedly called Christian Rosenkranz, or Rosenkreuz, Red Cross, right? The Rosy Cross, rather. Christian, of course, Christian, a true Christian, an alchemist who claimed to have gained his spiritual knowledge from travels in the Middle East. Notice, not at the Vatican in Rome, in the Middle East, from an unnamed Sufi sheikh, not the Pope, in Morocco, not Italy. Understand?
Yeah.
In 13, he returns to Germany with wealth he inherited from his adoptive father. He was adopted 3 times by wealthy families and a vast knowledge of the East. On his return, he makes contact with the leaders of various German occult and mystical groups. He comes to the attention of Rudolf Hess and Hermann Paul of the Germanen Order and helps to found the journal Runen and the Münchner Beobachter. The later journal was eventually purchased by the Nazi Party and renamed the Völkischer Beobachter. So the whole infrastructure of the Nazi Party came out of this Muslim Sufi Freemason. Right, not out of the Vatican, just so by the way. So Sobottendorf oversaw the founding of the Thule Society, and it became the cradle of the National Socialist Movement. In 1933, he took credit for inspiring Hitler's Mein Kampf in a book he wrote before Hitler came, and that's why he had to flee, because Hitler was very unhappy about that. And this is the Thule Society with the Nazi swastika and the sun symbol. Yes?
They were the Jesuits who were the Muslims, though, right? That's how it goes? They made the conspiracy?
Don't confuse me with the facts, okay? So I'm already struggling as it is, right?
So this is interesting, though. Everyone, look there. Look on the screen. Look at that symbol for the Thule Society. That looks a lot like a swastika symbol. And we won't do too much of a digression, but a little point to add here.
And look at the moon symbol here, the crescent moon.
Yes.
You will see this on symbols of Lilith as well.
And people will say, well, the swastika is in Hinduism. You're right. Well, it's a different direction, I think. But also,
you don't have to go look. You don't have to go to Hinduism. The attachment there is that supposedly Adam fell and settled in Sri Lanka or
that's
India.
What I mean. I was going to get to that.
And that's the link. So Adam is the original, whereas black people came from Satan, who lived on another planet or circling some star, and then came to Earth. And black people are made of Satan, and the Aryans are made of Adam. But this symbol goes back 2,000 plus years, 2,500 years in Germany itself. The swastika symbol goes back 2,500 years in Germany. You don't have to go anywhere else.
And the point is, though, just one thing. The point is that you see this demonic thread that's through all of the Gnostic religions and cults, because Hinduism is a Gnostic religion. And what Lloyd was just saying about where black people and white people come from is also called Mormonism, if I'm not mistaken. So you can look into that as well.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so Baphomet. Let's look at Baphomet or Muhammad. Modern scholars agree that the name, now this is the Eliphas Levi version, okay, from the 1600s, I believe, Eliphas Levi. Look at that same symbol we just saw, the same half moon. You'll see this with
Yeah.
Lilith. You'll see this in other places as well, that half moon. And notice Islam as a crescent and star, crescent, star.
Yeah.
Modern scholars agree that the name of Baphomet was an old French corruption of the name Muhammad, with the interpretation being that some of the Templars, through their military occupation of the Middle East, incorporated Islamic ideas into their belief system. And this was documented by the Inquisitors as heresy. And before people start saying they wanted, half the scholars, which are very popular and which you've read about, will say, well, the Templars walked on water, and the evil Catholic Church, what they did was they wanted their money. So what they did was the poor Boy Scouts were murdered to a man by the Catholic Church. Yeah, just go read the other half of the scholars you haven't bothered to look at, and they will tell you there was strong, credible evidence from people who were never tortured, who admitted freely that the Templars had effectively started worshipping the occult and were converting to Sufism and occultism. And also, this guy has a little, as you can see, a drive, what do you call that? A gear shift and boobies.
It's
which
right.
is also very transgender.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. In the Chanson de Simon Pou, written before 1235, a Saracen Islamic idol is called the Baphomets. The chronicler of the First Crusade, Raymond of Aguirre, called mosques Bafumarias. And in the trial of the Templars, one of their main charges was their supposed worship of a heathen idol head known as Baphomet. And Baphomet was Muhammad. St. John of Damascus critiqued the Saracens, which he says came from the Saras Kenwe, the destitute of Sarah. And they worshipped the morning star and Aphrodite, also known as Alilat. Okay, so these people are pagans. That's the Muslims he's referring to. To understand it, okay, so Baphomet had no association with Satan until into the 20th century. The word first turned up in a letter of 1098 by Anselm of Ribabont in the First Crusade. As the next day dawned, the Muslims called loudly upon Baphomet. So they called loudly upon Baphomet while we prayed silently in our hearts to God. Then we attacked and forced all of them outside the city walls. So the Baphomet was Muhammad. Yes?
Well, and people are going to say, oh, this bugs me. They just didn't understand what they were saying. I mean, they just couldn't understand their dialect, or they didn't hear what they were saying. Listen, you see this in many different places. People can make the distinction between a B and an M. And, to disregard it as just simple myth or something like that, this is a problem. Also, someone in the chat saying smearing the Templars. The Templars started off good, and then there were problems at the end. No one denies this.
No, the Templars were hated. For the last century, there was long talk in the last century of disbanding them and merging them, or just completely getting rid of them, because they, people say, the Rothschilds are evil. Well, the Templars were the Rothschilds of the day. And there were many, many stories of them turning traitor, allying with the Muslims, and undermining Christendom, undermining Europe, undermining the leadership of Europe. They had gone bad, okay? Because you've been given one side of the story only doesn't make you smart. It makes you indoctrinated.
Also, ladies and gentlemen, Freemasonry was good in the sense of the Masonic guild orders. These things can be corrupted. These people built the cathedrals, and then they were, the cathedral stopped being built largely because of Protestantism, and they basically had nothing to do, and they get mixed up with these weird things. So things start off good and they go bad sometimes. This isn't about the indefectibility of the Catholic Church or good Catholic history. It's just one aspect of an order that had a job ended up going screwy in the end.
So they begin to explore Islamic customs, okay? Now, of course, the Gnostic connection, now here's an interesting thing, that they speak of a cipher that was found, all right, where they speak of Baphomet was a coded translation for Sophia, a divine figure in Gnostic mysticism. So come back to this, we'll take a screenshot. I'm not going to go through all of this, but understand there's loads of information that has not been explored because it's not popular, because it goes against the narrative, okay? So Baphomet is a coded translation possibly for the Sophia. Then Baphomet, the iconic image of Baphomet was abruptly invented by one man, a French occultist named Eliphas Levi in the mid-19th century, who develops this new version, this goat version of the Baphomet. But here we've got Arkan Daral, an author and teacher of the Sufi tradition and Sufi magic, who argues that the Baphomet came from the Arabic word Abu Fihamat, Abu father, meaning the father of understanding.
Yep.
The father of the gnosis. wisdom,
course.
the Sophia.
Yep. People don't understand, okay? When people say Muslims worship the same God, there's two sides to that statement, okay? Yes, the individual Muslim believes that they're a monotheist. So in a philosophical sense, they say, I believe in one creator of heaven, earth, so on and so forth. But then when you look deeper into the texts, you say, just because they say that they worship one God doesn't mean they don't believe there are other gods. Also, it doesn't mean that they believe that the God that they're worshiping is the monotheistic God that we understand. So there's more to it. As Lloyd said in our last interview, it's same vocabulary, different dictionaries. And that's very important.
Yep, so let's continue. Right, so you've got that, all right? Then you've got the Baphomet. This is from the Oxford Dictionary. Baphomet, a form of the name Muhammad used by medieval writers, alleged name of the idol which the Templars were accused of worshipping. The great stress in the condemnation of the Templars is laid on the worship of Baphomet, right? There are plenty of historical records that attest to that fact. You just may not be aware of them, but there are plenty of historians that speak about that. Those historians don't get airtime. It's that simple. And now notice in Leviticus 17:7, they must no longer offer any of their sacrifices to the goat idols to whom they prostitute themselves. This is a lasting ordinance. So this is a corruption of the Bible again.
The old heresies keep coming back. That's what you look at heresies, my friends. Every old heresy, it comes back. The Satan has like 4 tricks, and he calls them different things.
Right, now, let's have a look. Nikolai argued against the identification of the mysterious Baphometus or Baphomet and Muhammad, which implied that the Knights Templar had secretly converted to Islam and were worshipping a Muslim idol. Instead, what Nikolai says, this scholar says, he was convinced that the Gnostic beliefs of the Knights Templar, okay, so he says, no, they didn't become Muslims, they became Gnostic. But we've already learned that Islam is Gnostic. So, a rose by any other name would look the same. So he explained that Gnosticism had emerged from the Kabbalah. Okay, fantastic. The Gnosticism emerged from the Kabbalah. Now, so let's have a look here. We'll talk about the Kabbalah in a moment. Baphomet, Encyclopedia of Occultism, right? So I get this from Lewis Spence. The goat idol of the Templars, Baphomet, okay? And they speak of the Baphometic idol as follows: a pantheistic and magic figure of the absolute. Remember, we've already spoken, Muhammad is what the whole universe was made of. We covered that at length last week. Baphomet says another charge in the accusation of the Templars was that to a great degree proved by the deposition of witnesses who were not tortured, okay? Some of the knights from the south added another circumstance in their confessions regarding to this head. Adore this head. This head is your God and your Muhammad. This is in the records. And, okay, there was a wooden head on which was painted the figure of Baphomet, and he says that he worshipped it by kissing its feet, exclaiming Allah or Salah, which he described as a word of the Saracens. We know the Saracens are the Muslims. So they would scream Allah and kiss the goat head. Okay? The verbum Saracenorum, the word of the Saracens, Allah. And the Templars had secretly embraced Mohammedanism, and the Baphomet is evidently a corruption of Muhammad. Von Hammer gave a Greek derivation of the word and assumed it as proof that Gnosticism was the secret doctrine of the temple. Now we go back to Gnosticism. There is every reason to believe that there was some foundation for the charges of heresy against the Templars, and they rendered their Christianity not quite so pure as that of Western Europe. It followed the doctrines and rites of the Gnostic Ophites of Islam, Baphomet being merely a corruption of Muhammad, rejection of Christianity in favor of a religion based on Gnostic dualism. Expressions as regards the worthiness of Saracen nations among whom the Templars had many friends. It is even possible that the Templars introduced into their rites practices which savored of Gnosticism or Mohammedanism. Need I go on?
That's fine. It's good. And again, people in the chat, this person says there were renegade, corrupted Templars. Doesn't mean all the Templars. Listen, Templars were around for like a ton of years. We're saying that there was a point when the Inquisition, and we trust the Inquisition, got to the point where it said there's a problem here. This happens. Look at the Jesuits. The Jesuits were like the greatest order in the church until like 1960, okay? And then things happen. It's just the way it is sometimes. Everyone just relax about it.
Yep. So look, Kabbalah. Now this is Etam Online, just from the Online Etymology Dictionary. Kabbalah, Jewish mystic philosophy from the 1520s. Hold on, I thought it went back to like 9 million BC or something, before the dinosaurs.
It's 8 million BC.
8 million, 8.5 million, and 20 minutes. But it only goes back, it says, to the 1520s, okay? And it says here, compared to the Arabic Kabbalah he received, he accepted, hence any secret or esoteric science. Hold on. Arabic Kabbalah? No, you can only smear Jews, right?
Yeah.
We're hypocrites. We only smear Jews. We defend Islam. We ignore Islam because it's okay, right? That's pretty much it. Do you understand what's going on here? Because Jewish mysticism is known as Merkava mysticism, and that goes way back. Kabbalah is a fairly new innovation, and basically it entered Europe as a very popular sort of pastime for Victorian ladies or whatever the story was. And in fact, it's very Islamic in its practice because you would follow practices which would give you barakat, which would give you blessings. It followed Sufi tradition. So it's pretty much, it looks a lot like an Islamic practice, but that's another story. Muslims in membership with the Templar Order. This is from the current modern day Templar Order. So cooperation between the Knights Templar and the Muslim Saracen Knights. Yeah, we think you're pissing your pants at church. Apologies. Templar Order was never against Islam. Muslims were in fact admitted to membership in the Templar Order. Salah ad-Din himself was given the Templar knighting ceremony near Alexandria, one of the major loci of, or places of, heresy. And here you go. It's the Knights of the Order of Salah ad-Din, Templar, Muslim Templars. I think that's a little out of order, but that's just me.
Yeah.
You see?
I see.
That's just me. Okay? So the enemies of Christ were generally regarded as the same enemies of Islam. So these guys had a completely backwards view. They're lying through their teeth here. They've got it very, very wrong, but there's a problem there. Okay? I'm not going to go into length. I need to cover a lot of slides in a short time. So now, okay, now you've got in France, these polemics were adopted in several conspiracy theories. You have the anti-Masonic Jesuit, Augustin Barruel, okay? And he says whose ideology, the Masonic French Revolution, Masonic, yes, there were lots of Masons in the French Revolution. And he speaks of the Kabbalistic Freemasons, the Templars, the Cathars, the Gnostics, and eventually the Manichaeans. And if you start to look at the presence of Islam in the 1700s, you would be very surprised. Let's just say that Muslims chopping people to death with axes and knives on streets and bridges, that doesn't go back to 2015. Trust me on that. It goes back more like 1715. They've been doing that for a long time in France. Let's have a look here at Idris Shah. Now, you might disagree with the guy or whatever, but everyone disagrees with everything. They say Lloyd just makes things up. Look, I'm showing quotations, citations, books. I make nothing up. I read off the screen. I show it on the screen, but okay. So Robert Graves, in the intro to The Sufis by Idris Shah, the Sufis were fortunate enough to protect themselves against the charges of heresy by Al-Ghazali. Okay, we spoke of him earlier, the highest scholar after Muhammad himself. He was a Sufi, became the highest doctrinal authority in Islam, and he reconciled Quranic religious myth with the rational philosophy, thus earning the title, the Proof of Islam, the highest honor in Islam. He's called the Hujjat al-Islam, the Proof of Islam. Sufis, the Sufis are an ancient spiritual Freemasonry, they tell us. Indeed, Freemasonry began as a Sufi society. It first reached England in the reign of King Athelstan in 924 and was introduced into Scotland disguised as a craft guild at the beginning of the 14th century by the Knights Templar. Your thoughts before I move on?
No, keep going. It's good.
All right. There's a shadowy traditions among the Masons of the craft's Saracenic origins. This is Hayden's Dictionary of Dates, okay? There's a tradition among the Masons of the craft's Muslim origins, right? Architects from the African coast, Mohammedans, brought it into Spain about the 9th century. And there's architects from, these are various sources. This is Hayden's Dictionary of Dates. Go to my folder, you'll find everything in my archive. Look for my archive, any of my description boxes of my videos. Freemasons were excommunicated by the Pope in 1738 and again on September 30th, 1865. In fact, Freemasons there have been more papal encyclicals written against Freemasonry than any other topic in the Catholic Church.
Yep.
So we've got Masons, Gnostics who come from the original Simon Magus, but okay, that's a maybe. Let's talk about the KKK. This is their holy book, the Quran. Take away the L, you've got the Quran. So the holy book of the KKK is called the Quran. And notice what they've got here, the Knights Templar, the Ku Klux Klan member as the Knight Templar. You see that? Knight Templar. It is derived from the name Islamic Quran. The earliest symbol of the KKK was not a cross. Their first symbol was the Islamic crescent and star.
Did you guys catch that? The earliest symbol of the KKK was not a cross. This is PR nonsense when they didn't, want to be associated with this, that they ended up using the cross to sort of appeal to the fallen away Christians or whatever. And this is how it started.
Now, Ivana says they will say they are Jews, but are from the synagogue of Satan is what I see. Yeah, now that statement, now I don't know if you are aware or unaware, if you're spreading propaganda, if you're lying to me, or if you are simply innocent, but if you read Revelation 2:9 and 3:9, if you go a couple of verses before, you'll know they name a very specific Gnostic group that say these idiots claim to be Jews, but they are not. Okay? So what most people do is they misquote that. They take that out of context and they say, Jews are actually from Satan. We must kill all the Jews, because you're not a nice person if you think that. Okay? So please do a little bit of background and, try some education. Okay, now
this guy's name is this Albert or Cecil? Finally, we found him.
We may have. He looks more like a Cecil, but good grief. So notice the crescent and star on his uniform. All right, this is another version. Notice like the Baphomet, one arm high, one arm low, as above, so below. The Hermetic idea, right? And you can see clearly the crescent and star. This was the last surviving uniform. This is from the archive of the University of Kentucky. The original KKK costume, 1890s, found in a house in Pulaski, Tennessee. And R.J. Brunson, this is the guy, an original Klansman, wearing the original robe, the only original robe in existence. And this is from, again, the archive of the University of Tennessee. Okay, that's obviously some kind of symbol. There's something going on here. He's making a symbol there. And this is likely the same man in the same uniform as above, but I'm not absolutely sure. This is from 1913, so yeah. And of course, here you've got the KKK, the men who are refusing to bow to the great image. So the Pope, they don't believe in Rome. See, the KKK. The Holy Bible, they're holding it there. And of course, burning a cross is a sacrilege. Okay, and the KKK burns the cross because they are sacrilegious.
Yeah. You have to also, ladies and gentlemen, a friend of mine, David L. Gray, he's a former Freemason. I've been on his show before. I spoke with him at a conference a few weeks ago, and he said it's important to get this information right when you're talking about Freemasonry, because often what will happen is people will go to these stereotypes they find here and there, and they talk to a Freemason about it, and they're like, that has nothing to do with me. And one of the things he said is that today they don't step on the papal tiara anymore. This is an advocacy for Freemasonry. But he's saying they used to do that in the past in the Southern Rites in the United States. And and he says, if you say that to a Freemason, they'll be, what are you talking about? I don't do that. But they did used to do it. And you see here the links to the Southern Rites of Freemasonry and Islam as well.
Okay, so now this is the fez, okay? This is the fez. And notice here you've got the symbol of Islam, the crescent and star. But this is also that curved moon, which is associated with Lilith, with Sophia. And you've got the Islamic scimitar and the word Muslim, also with multiple scimitars, okay? A symbol of Ottoman affiliation and adherence to... So hold on, I just need to want to deal with... Thomas says here, this guy misrepresents. Look, so Thomas states, this guy seems to have a faulty conception of what we believe. No, I see this all the time. I do not have a faulty conception. Maybe you personally are feeling guilty, so now you've got to try and absolve your guilt by saying, well, I personally don't. You speak only for yourself. I see this all the time because I talk about these highly contentious subjects on a regular basis. And maybe you personally are not guilty of this. That's nice. You speak only for yourself. Please sit down now. Right? So, the Fez, Morocco, in 1033, 6,000 Jews were killed there. There were further massacres in Fez in 1276 and 1465. And so this is a symbol of those massacres, and it was adopted as the Shriners' official headgear in 1872, which is very interesting. And no, I cannot find evidence of 50,000 Catholics being killed. Maybe over time, maybe over a century, maybe total, who knows. I cannot find evidence of that. I have tried hard. I have not found it. Okay, so Islam. Okay, that's great.
Nothing
Medina,
to do with Islam. Nothing to do with Islam.
Nothing to do with Islam. Muhammad, definitely Buddhist. ISIS, fascinating. And this is the symbol of Isis, the pagan god. Also, Isis was the goddess, the cult of the French atheistic cult of reason, of the Enlightenment cult of reason during the French Revolution.
Yeah, but Barack Obama told us it was ISIL. We were supposed to call it ISIL. Remember, it was different.
Okay, so hold on. So this guy's stating here. Again, now, see, Thomas is ignorant because in the beginning you said, I speak for the majority of Christians here who don't blindly defend people who claim Christ is in hell. I covered this in the beginning. You clearly weren't here for the beginning, and you clearly are ignorant of the facts of that situation. But those statements have led to people's deaths. So I don't have time to litigate the entire thing from the beginning, but unfortunately, you are simply not aware of the facts of this. I covered them in the beginning. I can come back and talk about them at length. But you are deflecting from the Muslims who will kill you. And you are repeating lies, which is simply designed by Soviets, by the Nazis, by Martin Luther, by Muslims to kill Jews. You are a dupe. You're indoctrinated by them. Sorry about that.
I'm just going to hide good old what's his name. There you go. All right.
Okay.
Back to it.
Okay, so let me continue. My apologies. That really upsets me because I did a series on another channel on the Talmud, and it took me months. I read the Talmud for 3 months solid. Every day I read it for 3 months, which is 3 months more than anyone else who lies about it. Okay? And then we went through a whole series of these claims on the internet about the Talmud, and my friend and I started this, and then I roped him in to confirm what I was finding. And we discovered that of the 100 or so claims against the Talmud about 99 or 98 of them were utterly false. Many of them were fabricated. They didn't even exist. They were literally fabricated. The rest were misquoted, were mistranslated. So what we did was we published a document, which you can buy from him. But also we did a series of 7 shows on Jews and the Talmud. And it got so bad, he had people ending up on his lawn. He had to get the police out. Eventually, the FBI got involved. And eventually, the same group that we were involved with, they had a manifesto which was found with the person that walked into a Jewish synagogue in California and killed 5 people. Okay? The very same people that were battling us online. People got murdered. My job in the Middle East was to make sure that crazy people didn't murder people. Understand, this upsets me. People died because of lies spread by people like yourself who claim to be holy. This upsets me. I have risked my life to protect people. I've put my life on the line to defend the lives of people. And then you spread lies that got millions of people killed. I am not impressed. Sorry about that, but this really gets to me. So, in view of some scholars, the greatest rival to Christianity in Rome in the 3rd century may not have been traditional Roman paganism, but the Egyptian mystery cult of Isis. So this harkens back to the Egyptian mystery cult of Isis. So now you've got the nobles. This is the Shriners. The significance of the fairs. The nobles wear rich costumes of Eastern character, and they speak of Morocco as a holy city. Morocco is where, of course, Christian Rosencrantz got Rosicrucianism. All right, now let's look at some Islamic Shriners. This guy, who's a white guy, maybe he's a crypto-Muslim. We hear about crypto-Jews a lot. Well, Islam, this is Elijah Muhammad. You may have heard of this guy.
Yes, he started the Nation of Islam.
Yes.
In the States. Yep.
Okay. And of course, they say among the oaths of the Masonic Shrine organization is one that says, "May Allah, the God of Arab, Muslim, and Mohammedan, the God of our fathers, support me to the entire fulfillment of the same. Amen, amen, amen." Okay. And then, of course, you've got Quran. See, so here you've got Muslim, Mohammedan, Arab, Allah. That is very interesting. Now, every Shriner is a Freemason. Not every Freemason becomes a Shriner, but a Shriner is a higher form of the Freemason.
Yes.
Right? So notice these white dudes, okay? These are all potentially serving the purpose of Allah, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Then you've got here General Douglas MacArthur. You've got President Gerald Ford, actor John Wayne, J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI, President Harry S. Truman, Chicago Mayor Richard Daley, U.S. Vice President Hubert Humphrey, the Prime Minister of Canada, this crazy-looking fellow here, John G. Diefenbaker.
Diefenbaker was, and just to put it in context, he was very conservative, which is ironic.
Yeah. So they want to know how isn't permissibly lying. Well, everything that I'm saying, literally everything is on the screen. Prove me wrong. Bring evidence to prove me wrong. Prove to me that Warren Harding wasn't wearing a Sufi cap. If you can do that, you're the dude. Okay? Prove to me he's not wearing that cap. Very, very simple. Everything that I'm showing has been a citation from a source, from a book. They've been consistent, and they are constant. So prove me wrong. It's very simple.
I'm going to address this guy again about the whole. He's been going on about the Templar thing. Listen, he uses the analogy here. There's predator priests, but not the majority of priests. We're not talking about the Templars was a military order. We're not talking about military orders as such. We're saying that there was a time in history when the authorities had to look into the goings-on of a particular group. So this is not the same thing as the priesthood per se. For example, many people will say today we should suppress the Jesuits. That'd be very sad if it happened. There'd be very good reasons for it, but it's nothing to do with everyone before them. It's about a particular historical time. So people need to understand that anyway.
Yeah, but look at his name is Dickheader. Do you understand? Do you understand what he's doing?
He's a philosopher.
Let's have a look. Yeah. So have a look here. Here you've got Shriners in the White House. And everyone says, well, the Jews went to the White House. Well, okay, what about these dudes?
Yeah.
They're possibly useful idiots, dupes for the Muslims, for the Muslim Brotherhood, for the Sufis, okay, who are highly anti-Christian, right? Let's continue. Harry S. Truman, President of the United States, Freemason and Shriner. Okay, there you go. There you go. He's wearing his Ararat Shrine Temple fez. Okay. They were so powerful that in 1952, Harry Truman and John F. Kennedy delivered their presidential campaign speeches at the shrine in Pittsburgh. Not at the synagogue, but at the
or the local
shrine. Let's have a look
center
here.
Or something.
Mecca Temple, ancient Arabic order, nobles of the mystic shrine. It's history and pleasures, order, and history of the order. So we've got 8 pages to go. These are the founders, a bunch of, well, as you can see, Caucasian men, right, who may well be Muslims working to spread Islam, right? You've got the ancient Arabic order, nobles of the mystic shrine, and the Muhammadan Caliph Ali, whose name be praised, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, Allah favor and preserve him.
Nothing to do with Islam.
Nothing to do with Islam. The salutation of distinction among the faithful is Salam Alaikum, which is Buddhist, right? To which is returned the gracious wish, Alaikum As-Salam, which is, I'm not sure.
It's Irish. It's ancient Gaelic.
Sounds very peaceful. Must come from some peaceful group. The secret knowledge symbolized by the crescent has always had its devotees in every age, and it is the master key to all wisdom, to the Sophia, to the Gnosis. And look to the east for light, like Morocco maybe. The beautiful emblem of the newborn light, the crescent. Understand? There's this whole connotation of this crescent moon, right? Gideon arose and slew Zeba and Zalmunna, and he took the crescents that were on the necks of their camels. Judges 8:21, RSV. And just for the guy, the PhD that claimed that I'm a King James only, and that Jesus gave 11 copies of the King James Bible to the apostles. Look, man.
I can't believe we took it seriously.
Learn what a sarcastic humor is and what a joke is. Maybe that was, I don't know, maybe you've had total sense of humor failure, whatever. Well, but this is the RSV, just so by the way. Sorry, yeah?
Listen, I mean, this guy, he's a PhD. He needs to go find out that lady that I was sitting beside at that wedding who had a PhD. She was doing her PhD in feminism and comedy. They can get together. She can teach him how to have a sense of humor.
All right. Okay, so now I've got, besides the crescents and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, the pagans of that region. So understand the idea of the crescent goes back, and these are the enemies of the Jews. These are the enemies of the people of the Bible. All right. So yeah. Now let's have a look at the keg patrol. This guy's got the Abu Ben Adam name, and he's wearing a fez. Okay, he's got a little car with the keg patrol. Let's have a look. Abu Ben Adam Shrine Mosque.
Yeah.
Interesting. Mosques. Mosques are Buddhist. God, there's a religion that has mosques. Oof, it's tough for me to figure this out.
It's Shintoism.
Japanese. I knew it. Japanese. Yeah. And notice AAONMS. Now, this is an anagram of, let's have a look at that. AAONMS.
Well, if it's Japanese, it stands for spicy tuna roll.
AAONMS. It's an anagram of a Mason.
Lloyd,
Mason.
Lloyd, not only are you the only person in the world who uses Microsoft Bing, you're also one of the only people in the world who uses Notepad still.
I use Notepad every day, multiple times a day.
Oh, goodness.
But understand, it's an anagram for a Mason. Let's continue. Who is this guy? This is the Abu Ben Adam Mosque, National Register of Historic Places, inventory. So this place is now a historic building. And Ibrahim ibn Adam, aka Ibrahim Balkhi, is one of the most prominent of the early Sufi saints. Isn't that an odd connection? His first spiritual guide was a Christian monk called Simeon, supposedly. But he's a Sufi, understand? AAO, NMS, anagram of a Mason, and this is the Mecca Temple. Okay, you can see the little Mecca temple here. Mecca, oddly, nothing to do with Islam, right? Mecca, fortunately. And here we go. On September 26, 1872, these men met with 11 others in New York's Masonic Hall, 114 East 13th Street. 114 is the number of chapters in the Quran, or number of degrees of the Quran. 13th Street, well, you tell me what the symbolism is, right? And the Arabic shrine was born, right? Let's continue. Mecca, of course. Now let's have a look here. The Masonic Sword of Allah. This is the Sword of Allah. This is the flag of ISIS. This is the flag of Islam, the flag of Jihad, the black flag of Jihad. This is a Masonic temple. Look here, the guy's wearing the fez. He's a Mason, but he's wearing a fez. Notice the minaret style, the Islamic mosque minaret style of the chair. Mm-hmm. And then look at the crossed swords here. The crossed swords over the Bible or whatever that book is. Do you understand the symbolism here? Muslim symbolism in a Masonic shrine.
Yep, that makes sense. It's people. This is why, as Catholics, it's so important to reclaim the traditional liturgy. All the symbols have been taken out. The enemies of the church know the symbols, how symbols are important. You are around the symbols, you imbibe them. This is why brands put symbols on their brands. You see it, you think of it. Okay, this is very important. Yes. And this part, I knew you were going to get to this. This is the pirates. I love this.
Yeah. So now I want to have a look at the Now this flag was flown by the pirates, right? So piracy, avast me heart is, that actually was something started by Muslims. Okay, this was a huge problem for America. It was a massive. The first war that the Americans fought was the Marines were created to go fight the pirates and go rescue people in Libya. Okay, so the shores of Tripoli and all of that. Now, at the distance, this is what the pirate flag looked like. You understand? Now, if we go put that, you see the similarity here?
Nothing to do with Islam.
Nothing to do with Islam. And a great number of Dutch and English converted to Islam, and many of them became pirates. Yeah. And then went and robbed people. They went and stole people and took them back. This is the Masonic Sword of Allah. This is a common symbol. And you can see it's the same sword, the same Masonic idea, the jihad that is taking place here. The 9th degree, and notice there are 9 degrees of Sufism. Okay? Now, let's have a look at the Islamic Temple of California. I need to look into that. I always forget to. Okay? So this is the Islam Temple, the pilgrimage to Sacramento in 1915, the Islam Temple. And here they are kicking out the government, and these Sufis, these Sufi, these Shriners are now taking over the California government, California. So, very interesting. This is a real event. It actually happened. I don't know if they threw the government out, but this is their intention.
One more connection. Ladies and gentlemen, California was started as a Catholic place. The capital is literally called Eucharist, Sacramento, sacrament. And the Shriners, enemies of the church, are trying to take over it. It's not an accident.
Right. So, completely normal activity. What is a crypto-Muslim? Everyone talks, well, they're crypto-Jews. Well, what about crypto-Muslims? We've just seen a whole bunch of crypto-Muslims. So, yeah, that looks
like something we cannot describe, okay?
Yeah, close the eyes of your kids, people. That looks a little human centipede, just so by the way. What is they? Okay, let's see what's going on here. This is Los Angeles. This is the Shriners Arab Patrol in costume, dancing with people looking on in 1925. And the notes on the photograph are handwriting on negative states. Patrol from Al-Malaika Temple, LA. Subjects, Al-Malaika Temple, Los Angeles. Ancient Arabic Order of the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine for North America. Let's have a look at some Sufi dancing. Let's have a look. See, this is what the Sufis do, and these guys, as we saw, are Sufis. Let's have another quick look again. You see, this is what they do. And let's go do another one. Let's continue. Let's look at Sufi circle dancing. I didn't enable audio, so you're not probably going to get the audio coming through, but let me see. Okay, let's play this one. You see?
Looks like, well, that's what happens in Mecca.
So they are, whatever it is they're doing, but this is what these guys are doing. So it's got nothing to do with Islam, fortunately. So the Gnostic Acts of John and Circle.
I have 4 minutes. I don't want to cut you off, but I have a call I have to go.
Oh, we're done. This is the final slide. This is literally the final slide. Perhaps the most famous, so the Gnostic Acts of John and circle dancing, perhaps the most famous of these alternative rituals is the dance of Jesus and the apostles in a Gnostic book, as portrayed in the apocryphal Acts of John, a vivid and imaginative 2nd century description of the apostles' missionary journey And the Apostle John recalls how on the night before his arrest and crucifixion, Jesus commanded the apostles to form a circle around him and to dance. And he sang a hymn to which they responded in a series of amens. And if you'd heard that last one, it goes, ahen, 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 ahen. And it's a clear allusion to the dance scene from the Acts of John is found in the Psalms of the Manichaeans. And you've just seen them perform that right there. Done.
Amazing.
My apologies for losing my cool, but really, I went through a bad scene with these heavily anti-Jewish Christians who ended up having people murdered. Their words literally incited death, and this upsets me when people think they're simply being rational when not.
Don't worry about it. Listen, I've talked about this before. I'm a traditional Catholic. Okay, I'm not gonna jump onto the evangelical understanding of the scriptures and all this kind of stuff. But there is no place for. It's a basic genetic fallacy. It's not even to take the race and the ethnicity out of it. A genetic fallacy in philosophy is you apply characteristics to a group and then apply those as if they're immutable. This is just ridiculous. This is intellectually stupid. So I have no time for it either. Okay.
Yeah, so final word to you. I've said my bit. Hopefully it made sense, was coherent. Consistent.
It was amazing. People in the chat, their minds are blown. The last one we have, I had to re-upload it because I had to change the audio from me yelling at my kids to close the door. But both of them together have got about 25,000 views now. That's just in a few days. This one, I'm sure, is going to be mind-blowing for people as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please go to Lloyd's channel. I'll make sure I put that in the link to the description to this video. And go more in depth. He comes here, he does a presentation on his own time. This is volunteer work for him. So please go there and find a way to support him. He has a link in his video descriptions for that as well. And yeah, that's it. And Lloyd, this has been amazing. I know you're working on some information on Luther and Darwin and all those sorts of things. I'd love to have you on when you get that. I'm sure we'll talk and we'll text on Signal after.
Darwin deliberately created Darwinism is deliberately anti-Christian. He designed it specifically to be anti-Christian, to undermine Christianity. And Darwinism is social Darwinism. You can't separate the two. The man has blood on his hands.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, let me know what you think in the comments. Lloyd, thank you very much. This has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.